You owe money right now. Maybe it is a car loan. Maybe it is a credit card balance you keep meaning to pay off. Maybe it is a student loan that has been sitting in the background of your life for so long you barely register it anymore. And here is what is strange. You are not panicking. You are not lying awake at night. You are not avoiding the problem. You are just living with it, the way you live with a slow internet connection or a drawer that never closes right. It is there. You know it is there. And somehow that feels fine. That feeling has a name. And understanding it might be the most important thing you do for your financial future this year. Because debt did not always feel normal. There was a time when owing money to a bank or a lender was considered a serious, uncomfortable, even shameful situation. People avoided it. They saved up before they bought. They waited. They delayed. Something changed. And the change was not accidental. The shift started decades ago, and it was not driven by a change in human values. It was driven by a change in financial systems, marketing psychology, and the way money itself was redesigned to flow into your life before you earned it. The mechanics of that redesign are still running quietly in the background of every purchase you make today. To understand why debt feels so normal, you have to understand how your brain processes what is familiar. Psychologists call this the mere exposure effect. When you encounter something repeatedly, your brain begins to treat it as safe. Not because it is safe, just because it is familiar. The more you see something, the more comfortable you feel around it. Familiarity and safety are not the same thing, but your brain often cannot tell the difference. Debt became familiar, and so your brain began to treat it as safe. Think about when you first got a credit card. There was probably a moment of friction, a small hesitation, the awareness that you were spending money you had not earned yet. But then you used it once, and the world did not end. And you used it again, and slowly the hesitation disappeared. The familiar ritual of swiping or tapping replaced the earlier discomfort. And now the card is just a card. The balance is just a number. The interest is just something in the fine print. This is the exposure loop. Your nervous system habituated to debt the same way it habituates to background noise. At first, you notice it. Then you do not. Richard Thaler, a behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize in 2017, spent decades studying how people actually make financial decisions versus how they are supposed to make them. One of his most important findings was that humans do not treat money as a fungible, rational resource the way economics textbooks assume. Instead, we organize money into mental buckets. We have a bucket for bills, a bucket for fun, a bucket for savings, and crucially, we have a bucket for debt, which many of us have mentally reclassified from a crisis into a fixed cost. That reclassification is extremely costly. When debt becomes a fixed cost in your mind, you stop treating it as a variable. You stop asking whether it should exist. You start building your entire financial life around it. Your budget assumes the payment. Your lifestyle assumes the debt. The question is, never should I have this debt. The question becomes, how do I manage this debt comfortably? That is the trap, not the debt itself, the comfort. Now here is the part that makes this even more interesting. Debt was not always accessible the way it is now. For most of the 20th century, getting a loan required demonstrated creditworthiness, a relationship with a local bank, and often collateral. Credit was rationed. Lending was conservative. The assumption was that you would only borrow money in situations where you genuinely needed it and could genuinely repay it. That changed in the 1970s and 1980s in the United States, when a combination of financial deregulation, the removal of interest rate caps, and the rise of computerized credit scoring made it possible for lenders to extend credit to far more people at far greater scale. The credit card industry exploded. Personal loans became a consumer product. Buy now, pay later arrangements started appearing in retail settings. The system was redesigned around a simple business insight. The longer someone carries a balance, the more money a lender makes. A person who pays their full balance every month is, from a lender's perspective, not a particularly valuable customer. But a person who carries a balance month after month, paying minimum payments, generating interest charges that compound year after year, that person is extraordinarily profitable. So the system was not designed to help you pay off debt quickly. It was designed to make debt feel manageable while lasting as long as possible. The minimum payment is perhaps the most elegant piece of psychological engineering in modern consumer finance. It is just low enough to feel achievable. It reduces your anxiety. It gives you the sensation of making progress. And it is calculated in a way that, if you follow it precisely, will keep you in debt for years or decades longer than you imagine. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose research on human judgment and decision-making won Kahneman the Nobel Prize in 2002, identified a pattern called anchoring. It means that when your brain is given an initial number, it uses that number as a reference point for all subsequent judgments, even when the initial number is arbitrary or misleading. The minimum payment is an anchor. It tells your brain that this is the normal amount to pay. Paying more than the minimum starts to feel optional, even generous. Paying the full balance can start to feel unnecessary or excessive. Your brain has been given its reference point, and it works backwards from there. You can see this in the research. Studies have consistently shown that when people receive a credit card bill, the presence of a minimum payment amount causes them to pay less than they would have paid if no minimum had been stated. The anchor pulls spending behavior toward it. The minimum was designed to feel like the floor, but for millions of people, it functions as the ceiling. Sendil Mullainathan, an economist at Harvard, and Eldar Shafir, a psychologist at Princeton, spent years studying what they called the scarcity mindset. Their research, published in their book Scarcity, found that when people feel financially constrained, their cognitive bandwidth narrows. They become focused on the immediate, urgent problem in front of them and lose the mental capacity to think long-term. This is what happens when debt becomes a permanent feature of your financial life. Not just the debt itself, but the low-level cognitive load of managing it, tracking it, worrying about it, optimizing around it, all of that occupies mental space. That occupied space is space you are not using to plan, to invest, to think about your financial future 10 years from now. Debt does not just cost you money, it costs you attention. And here is the counterintuitive part. As incomes have risen, debt has risen alongside them. You would expect the opposite. You would expect that as people earn more, they borrow less. But lifestyle inflation happens in both directions. When your income rises, your spending rises to meet it. And your access to credit rises with your income, so your capacity to carry debt rises too. Higher earnings do not automatically translate into lower debt. Often they translate into larger debt that feels proportionally similar. Morgan Housel, who wrote The Psychology of Money, makes a point that stays with you. He says that wealth is not what you earn. Wealth is what you do not spend. The gap between what comes in and what goes out is where financial security is actually built. Debt does not just reduce that gap. In many cases, it eliminates it entirely. When your monthly debt payments consume a significant portion of your income, the gap closes. And when the gap closes, you have almost no room to absorb an unexpected expense, a job change, a health event, or any of the other genuinely unpredictable things that happen in a real life. The normalization of debt is not just a personal financial issue. It is a vulnerability that most people are carrying quietly, in the background, without fully accounting for the risk. Here is what makes it particularly difficult to address. The solution is not complicated. The math is not hard. The principle, spend less than you earn, reduce what you owe, build a gap, is something almost everyone already understands. The problem is not information. The problem is that debt has been normalized so successfully that most people have stopped feeling the urgency that would motivate change. You cannot solve a problem your brain has reclassified as a routine. This is worth sitting with. Not as a source of guilt or shame, but as a genuine observation about how systems can reshape behavior at scale. The financial industry did not force anyone into debt, but it did work very deliberately to make debt feel ordinary, manageable, and even responsible. It reframed borrowing as leverage. It reframed interest as a small fee for convenience. It built an entire consumer culture around the idea that you deserve it now and can figure out the payment later. And it worked. Because the human brain is extraordinarily good at adapting to whatever its environment treats as normal. The practical reflection is not about any specific debt you carry or any specific action you should take today. The principle matters more than the tactic. And the principle is this: if something has become so familiar that you have stopped questioning it, that familiarity deserves a second look. Debt that feels comfortable is not necessarily debt that is harmless. The fact that you have stopped noticing it does not mean it has stopped working against you. The interest compounds whether or not you are paying attention. The mental load continues whether or not you consciously register it. The gap between your income and your actual financial progress stays narrow whether or not it bothers you anymore. The discomfort you stopped feeling was not a sign the problem was solved. It was a sign your brain had finished adapting. You owe money right now. Maybe it is a lot. Maybe it is a little. Maybe you think about it every day, or maybe you have not thought about it in weeks. The question is not how comfortable you are with that number. The question is what that number is quietly costing the version of you who is 10 years from now, still waiting for the gap to open up.